Hey boys, what's up, my dudes? Talking about the most perfect motocross game, supercross game you could ever have in the history of mankind, okay? That's what this video is all about. I know I've kind of hinted towards this a little bit in the past. I've kind of made videos talking about it a little bit, but I don't feel like I've ever actually dedicated like a full video to this whole kind of like combining, the milestone supercross games with the MX versus ATV official, motocross tracks and the MX versus ATV games. I've never really made like a full video on that. So that's what this is all about. Basically, like if you could perfectly combine Monster Energy Supercross, the official video game 4, with like MX versus ATV All Out 2, right? Like that's pretty much what I'm talking about here. Assuming that, MX versus ATV All Out 2 would also have the, the replica Lucas Oil Pro National tracks in it whenever that next MX versus ATV game comes out. I'm not really sure if it is going to have that or not, but assuming that it would have that, right? That being the next big motocross game, like having that combination game. Oh my God, bro. Like, could you imagine if it was like the graphics from, the milestone games like Supercross 3, right? It was the graphics, it was the objects, it was all that kind of stuff, the realistic looking bikes and all that. But then you took like some of the little bit bigger, more fun factor jump design of MX vs ATV All Out, and you took, a little bit more of like the kind of content that you would get from an MX vs ATV All Out, Supercross, Motocross, Free Ride, Freestyle, all the kind of stuff you expect in an MX vs ATV game, right? You get all that. You get the official Supercross tracks and the official Pro Motocross National tracks in the same game, plus the 3 free ride tracks and the whatever else, you know what I mean? A cool little like trail series track or whatever. But like taking the best of both worlds, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and, play around and lie to you. There's negatives to both of these franchises and both of these games when you talk about like Supercross 3, the official video game, and MX vs ATV All Out or whatever. Like they have their issues, right? But they also have their good things to them too. And it's interesting when you think about, it's almost like they're opposite in a way, right? It's kind of funny. It's like the milestone games, it's all about the visual side of it. Now I will give it to Milestone with this Supercross 3 game. They have definitely amped up their whole, physics, actual gameplay side of their game for sure. This is the first real Milestone game I felt like they actually really tried to, put some time into the actual feeling of the bike and the inertia of the bike and the gameplay. The inertia, bro. Gotta have that inertia. Like with Supercross 3, it's like finally they started kind of putting some effort into that. But it would be just so cool to have that kind of like Supercross 3 type physics, but it's mixed with more of an MX versus ATV like reflex, fluent, flowing whip system, cornering system. It's a cool like mixture between the two, right? And so that's what would be really cool, Yeah, MX vs ATV All Out definitely has its physics issues. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, it's definitely got its bizarre, weird. Even when you watch some of the, quote unquote professional MX vs ATV All Out players and these dudes that really know how to set up their bike and blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff. Even when you see their gameplay, it looks so weird. Like, it looks so weird on MX vs ATV All Out. It looks like you're looking at some sort of MX vs ATV, Unleashed mixed with some newer motocross game. It's super bizarre. Like, they're just landing way on the back wheel. It does not look realistic at all when you see the pros on MX vs ATV All Out. It looks super weird. And just the fact that it's got kind of that mobile, do 5 backflips over a 10-foot jump. It's got a really bizarre mobile motocross game feeling to it. That's kind of where more of that reflexy feel comes into play, right? You know, what I mean by combining both of these games is almost more so talking about like combining Supercross 3 with like Reflex, right? But then taking the official national tracks of MX vs. ATV All Out and taking the official Supercross tracks of Supercross 3, combining all that into one game, combining the track editors so you've got some sort of a cool like built-in track editor like what the Supercross games have, but it also takes a cool mixture of like a PC-based track editor like what Reflex has on PC, you know, kind of getting some sort of a combination track editor thing where you can kind of have something that's easy to use, but then it's also really complex, at least on the PC version. You know, I really mean like a perfect combination of the Milestone Supercross games and the, you know, MX versus ATV games in every way. I think that would be the most perfect game of all time. And I know it's a long shot. I know some of you guys are like, all right, good one, Spence. Like, that's never going to happen, right? Like, I totally get it, but you got to understand, it's actually not as much, I don't feel like it's as much of a long shot nowadays as what people, you know, think that it is. I mean, yeah, before they got under the same parent company, you know, before THQ Nordic and all them bought out Milestone, yeah, it was a long shot because they were direct competitors. It was like, obviously, they're never going to come together for a game, but now that they bought Milestone out, now that they're under the same parent company, it's really not that crazy of a thing to imagine or that crazy of a idea to think of. Like, this is definitely a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but I'm just saying it's definitely a possibility. I think the only real restriction is trying to get the real life, like, AMA Supercross and then the Lucas Oil Pro Motocross to be able to sign off on a deal where they will agree to have both of their things in the same game. That's where it becomes more difficult, right? I don't think just the game companies coming together making the game is the difficult part at all, because they're already under the same parent company, and these Milestone games are already starting to feel more like an MX versus ATV game as it is anyways. They're already kind of doing this a little bit as it is anyways, if you haven't realized that with Supercross 3, you know, compared to all the other Milestone games, this is way more like an MX versus ATV game than any of those other Milestone games. And it's just kind of, you know, it's not a coincidence, guys, that they just got bought out by THQ Nordic, the MX versus ATV team, you know, a company, right? I'm pretty sure that's why you got Supercross 3 the way that it is, because of all that, right? So, and, you know, I've already said this multiple times before since Supercross 3 came out. I know some of you Spencer Turley haters out there just can't seem to accept this, but like I've said before, I would rather play Supercross 3 than I would MX vs. ATV All Out. That's how much more I like the physics of Supercross 3 than MX vs. ATV All Out. I mean, MX vs. ATV All Out, it's not like it has bad physics. Trust me, we've been there and done that. MX vs. ATV Supercross, right? Like, we've been there and done that. It's not that bad. They're definitely stepping in a cool direction. You know, you've got free whips, you've got tricks, you've got a lot of movement on the bike, you've got skill gap to the jump rhythms and bigger jumps and all that kind of stuff. They definitely have added a lot of cool things with All Out, but to me personally, it just lacks that like fluent flow feeling of what Reflex had. You know, it's kind of missing that. I don't even know how to explain it. Just that, I don't know, that more realistic look on the bike, and I don't know, little hard to explain that. But I feel like with Supercross 3, they're starting to get closer to that sort of balance, you know, where it's like you've got movement on the bike, but it's not crazy insane, you know, 360 no scope backflips. You know, it's not so like mobile game feeling. Like, what is that right there? Come on now. Like, you should not be able to do a double no-hander backflip that easily in a motocross game. You just shouldn't be able to do that. Like, I don't know. It just seems like MX vs. ATV All Out took more of the approach of fantasy, more of the approach of like mobile game feeling, and I don't know if that's because they They took a lot of the physics fillings from like some of the older MX vs. ATV games, like Unleashed or Untamed, but there's a certain feeling to All Out to me that feels like I'm playing an outdated motocross game in a way. It's kind of hard to explain. I mean, the whips look pretty cool in this game. They're fun to throw. You can throw all different kinds of whips. You know, kudos to them. I've been begging for that forever. They've got a lot of content in MX vs. ATV All Out. You know, that's something I've also been begging for since it's such lacking content we've had in these motocross games the past quite a few years, right? So, like, they've done a lot of good things, but it's just missing that, I don't know, that more realistic, reflexy, not so mobile motocross game kind of feeling to the physics of the bike. And some of you guys are saying, Spence, you're not setting your bike up right. Spence, do this, do that. Dog, like, I've watched the best of the best players of MX vs. ATV All Out. I've seen their gameplay on YouTube. I've seen how it looks. Like, you don't have to try to explain to me anything. Like, I've seen it, dog. I know what it looks like. It looks fucking insane. It looks like not real at all. Like, they're literally landing, like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's like they're playing Unleashed on steroids or something. That's basically what it looks like. It doesn't look like a modern day fluent flowing motocross game at all. So, to say the least, but yeah, definitely let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this whole combination, motocross, supercross game. I don't know. I just think it's inevitable, basically. I think we're going to get this at some point in some kind of a way, Like, it just about has to happen. And I don't know. I just think it would be so much smarter to have that amazing arcade motocross game, all the good things from the Milestone series, all the good things from the MX vs. ATV series put into one game, and then we can sit there and enjoy that one amazing arcade motocross game for a decade long or more, like we did with Reflex, versus having 7 Milestone games come out every other year, and then you've got an MX vs. ATV game, another game over here on the side. It just splits the player base so much, it splits the fan base, it splits the track content, it's just not, I mean, when you're trying to compete with these games like MX Simulator and, MX Bikes and some of these other games that are really Reflex for that matter, you're trying to compete with all these games that have these super cool track editors, tons of track content, custom bikes, custom gear, importable objects, unlimited tracks, super deep skill gaps, all replica tracks of every single kind of real life track, Supercross or Motocross, right? That's what it comes down to. These arcade motocross games are having to compete with these, MX simulators and stuff like that, because they're just getting more and more popular nowadays with more people getting on PC. So, they're going to have to start doing something to compete with those games. And the only real way they're ever going to do that is a combination arcade motocross game. That's the only way they're ever going to do it. I'm just being straight up honest with you. Like, if you want to have that amazing, like the impact that Reflex had when it came out, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to not only have replica Supercross and Motocross tracks in one game, but you're also going to have like normal non-replica Supercross and Motocross tracks in that same game too. And non-replica, like full-blown separate free ride tracks of all different biomes, like, northern light biomes, tropical biomes, all that, desert dune biomes. You're going to have all that kind of stuff on top of all that. And some sort of a side like trail series or enduro cross series or 50cc bikes, or, you got to have that other little fun side stuff to it as well. And that's really the ticket to that perfect arcade motocross game, man. It really is. Like, could you imagine it's kind of like a Reflex 2, but with like replica motocross and replica supercross tracks and a full-blown track editor in it that can work inside of the game. That's the kind of game I'm talking about. I don't mean just make another Reflex. We already have Reflex. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people get that twisted. I'm not trying to just have another Reflex. You know what I mean? You've got to advance it, but it needs to be 69.9% like Reflex or more. I just said that for the shits and giggles. It needs to be like I would say, at least 80% reflex physics, and then you just sort of integrate a little bit of the milestone Supercross physics, Supercross 3 physics, let me clarify. And then maybe you integrate just a hair of the freeness of All Out's physics to it or something. You can make something really cool that's very, very similar to Reflex, but at the same time, it's still something that feels advanced and something like a new game. It doesn't just feel identical to Reflex. So I feel like they've kind of struggled with trying to do that over the past few games. But surprisingly enough, it seems like Supercross 3 to me is one of the closest to Reflex since Reflex games there has been, in my opinion. Obviously, All Out is kind of sort of, but not really. Alive is, pretty close to Reflex in a lot of ways, even though it still is different. But Supercross 3 to me, I don't know why, it just, man, that game feels good, It feels a lot like Reflex to me. Yeah, it still has its issues, and it still has its sort of, kind of only few different ways you can throw whips and stuff. It kind of does have a few little weird things, but they're definitely catching on to that, like, very, very endless skill gappy feeling with Supercross 3. They're starting to tap into that, and I'm not talking about like, oh, you got to have your bike set up this one particular way. Oh my God, like it's so extreme, like MX versus ATV, All Out. I'm talking about like it feels good from the start with like even a stock setup, but then still you can go in there and advance upon that and get a lot better at the game and get faster at the game. I feel like Supercross 3 really nailed a lot of those aspects, in my opinion. Whereas All Out, it's almost like you have to do setup changes just to try to combat the bizarre physics issues and bugs of the game in some occasions. And in a lot of occasions, that doesn't even really fix it or avoid it. It just allows you to go faster. So it kind of, I don't know really how to explain it, but if you want to see the weird things with MX vs. ATV All Out physics, just go look at some of the pro All Out players out there. Go look at their gameplay. Okay, I'm talking about some of the tippity top of the slope, Epic Fate, whatever, pro dudes on All Out. Just go look at their gameplay, and you will see what I'm talking about. It literally doesn't even look real at all. It looks so like janky and bizarre and fake, and I don't know how to explain it. It certainly, no matter how good you get at a game, it shouldn't look that weird. You know what I mean? It definitely shouldn't. So, a lot of different physics things they could improve upon for the next MX vs. ATV game. That's what I kind of mean by, having that combination game. I feel like some of the physics things they've done with Supercross 3 could help some of the things with the next, like, MX vs. ATV game. And some of the things they did back in Reflex, they could still use things from that. Track design wise and the whole nine, they definitely need more of the Reflex style terrain deformation and like having the dry hard pack tracks versus how the sand tracks deform with the terrain deformation. All that stuff is completely different depending on what kind of track you're on with Reflex. They have got to get that in this next whatever game that is going to be coming out. They've got to do that. Like, you can point back to Reflex in so many ways and so many occasions, and it's going to help your arcade motocross game, like, straight up, like, period, dude. It's going to help it a lot, So, not only all that, but like I've spoken about before, having that, custom gear editor inside of the game, or custom helmet designer inside of the game, custom bike graphic designer, multiple different kind of bikes, 85cc bike, and, like I've been talking about in some videos before, having the whole starting on a small bike, having to go to Loretta's and Ponca inside of the game and get a better ride, go from a 50 to an 85, and then you got to get you got to get on a factory team, and if you don't do good enough at the amateur races, you got to be on a privateer team for when you go pro. And then you go to the actual pro replica Supercross and national tracks in the game. You know, that's the game I'm talking about, having it all in one. It's like literally going through real life motocross journey, like real life motocross campaign, motocross, amateur motocross, and all the replica amateur tracks, going through all that on the smaller bikes, working your way up, having an actual real campaign to the game that actually matters and feels cool and, makes you interested in it. And then you can work your way up to actually, getting on a factory ride for the replica Supercross tracks in the game and the replica motocross tracks in the game. And I think if they ever came out with a combination game like this, they could just have it to where it's like every next year they could come out with the next replica motocross and Supercross tracks of the next year. Like, let's just say this new game comes out in 2021 or whatever. Well, and it comes with all those replica tracks. Well, you could have like the next year where it's the whole new 2022 replica national and Supercross tracks in that same game, but they're like pay DLC, right? Instead of having to make a whole new game, you could just make it pay DLC. And that way all the tracks stay in the same game. If you have a deep enough of a skill gap, you won't even need a new game. Your game will be good enough. It's kind of like how Reflex has lasted for a decade plus, and MX Simulator has lasted for a decade plus. It's because the core of the physics is so good, you don't feel the need to change a game every year or every other year. All you need is just more and more replica tracks, more and more track content. So I definitely think that sort of a business model is the way to go, and you've kind of seen MX vs. ATV start to do that a little bit with their replica pro motocross tracks, right? Coming out with that next year of pro motocross DLC versus coming out with a whole new game for it. So you've kind of already started to see that come together. It's just, man, some of those higher up dudes in these companies just need to put their brains together and make this amazing, motocross, supercross game that I'm talking about. They got to find a way to do it, man. You got to find a way to do it. It will pay dividends, dog. I'm telling you, it will be worth it. It will be worth your time. It will be worth your money. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, you got to see the vision. You got to see the dream. If there's any way in hell possible that you can make this kind of a game happen, you dudes need to try everything you can to make it happen. Like, I don't know. I just think that's the ticket for arcade motocross gaming. That's it. I mean, that would be the pinnacle of all pinnacles to be able to have that kind of a game. It's kind of like a arcade mecha motocross supercross game, right? With everything that you want and nothing that you don't, right? It's kind of like that. I don't know. I think it's definitely possible to pull that off. And then it would be so cool to be able to play that arcade motocross game like we play MX Simulator and like we played Reflex, where it's, you can stay on that same game for years and years and years, and they keep coming out with more and more content, and you don't feel so scatterbrained everywhere. You don't feel like all the different track content is just scattered all over the place, like with the Milestone games. You feel like what you're putting into it's actually for something. It's actually worth something, the time you're putting in. Because, they could have the whole pro racing ranks, real-life pro racing side to it with paid money, kind of like what RF does with MX Simulator. They could have a whole thing like that every year, right? That would just be so cool, dude. Having the Supercross and Motocross replica tracks in the same game. Like, dog, that's the ticket. That is the ticket.